Stephanie, you're the first person on our program that has mentioned this. This is actually very interesting.
So having a funeral home who is considerate, who is understanding what you're going through, who's going to take the time to hold your hand can be very, very helpful.
It's interesting. We're living in a time where there's so much information.
Where did you read that?
There's a very high chance that that real estate will probably be sold.
Extremely irritating that our financial institutions are not well trained in this aspect.
Like if the house doesn't look perfect and it doesn't look like some sort of like model home that's going to look good on Zillow or something, they're kind of afraid to do it. They feel like maybe it looks bad on them.
And you would think that people die every day. Most people should be trained in probate because this is something that is not unusual. People die every day.
Investors from all over the United States descend upon the personal representative, okay, to try to get that property. Now, Stephanie, someone's going to want to hire you. Someone needs a very good attorney, and you're the right attorney for them.
The real estate typically is your largest asset. And I just want to say thank you, Jeremy, for being the kind of realtor, the kind of broker, the kind of person who's not going to be predatory towards clients who are in a very vulnerable position.
Welcome to the Texas Probate Real Estate Podcast. My name is Jeremy Kritt, and I'm the owner and broker of Kritt Real Estate and founder of Texas Probate Real Estate. On this podcast, we like to bring you professionals in the probate space to help you navigate this difficult process. Today, I have an amazing guest, Stephanie Louie from the Louie Legacy Law firm. She's going to share with us some very helpful information that I know you're really going to enjoy and learn from. Stephanie, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Well, you know, we've had a lot of guests on this podcast since we started it, but I've been very excited to have you here on this program. And I think one of the things that I really like about you, and as I've gotten to know a little bit more about your work, is that you like to just take a real practical approach, not only to the law, but to your clients. Before we get into your insights, which are very unique and interesting and helpful, I just want to learn a little bit about you, the person. Tell us a little bit about your background, where you come from. How did you get into law? How did you get into probate? I always like talking about how people got into probate because it's kind of a very interesting area of the law, and I feel it's more personal than a lot of other areas. So tell us a little bit about that. Anything you're comfortable sharing with us.
Yeah, thank you. I am originally from California, Los Angeles, California. I went to UC Berkeley for undergrad and University of San Francisco School of Law. I graduated a while ago. I won't date myself, but I graduated in 2012, and I was practicing in California as a civil litigator for many years. Eventually, it got to the point where my husband was telling me that if I didn't stop litigating, coming home angry every night, picking fights with him, that it was not going to be sustainable for our marriage. And I realized that he was completely right. Some litigators are really great at just leaving it all at the door when they come home. I was not. So I actually had to interview a bunch of transactional attorneys, and estate planners were the most normal and nicest of the bunch. So I decided that was the way I wanted to go. I went into estate planning and probate after having done several years of civil litigation. It was kind of a hard transition because attorneys generally like to stick with what they know, but I made the transition and it's been really good. In 2018, actually, we lost our firstborn son, Nathan, right after he was born at the hospital. And so we decided we needed a change, and we felt very called to come to Texas. And we've been out here since 2019. It's been great. I've had the opportunity to meet so many lovely people in Austin who are always willing to help and share and just be really kind. So I've enjoyed my time here very much. We now have a daughter, 3-year-old Hannah. We have a dog, and we are living out in Georgetown, which we love. Our neighbors are amazing. You see them out on the street and they wave at you, and I'm like, oh my gosh, are you waving at me? It's lovely.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I love that. I love that. I'm from California too, by the way.
Yeah.
So I feel definitely at home in Texas. I love Texas. So that's awesome. And I see you're very proud of Texas with the Texas flag behind you. So you're a real Texan now.
It's my design, Louie Legacy Law. I did the star partly for Texas and partly for my son Nathan. And when I think about him, I think of stars.
I love that. I love that. I love that. So let's go now into a little bit about your approach to probate, and just as a frame for people who are listening as we get into some of these topics that we're going to talk about. You take a real practical approach. And I think that's kind of interesting because some attorneys are very kind of like, law is very intellectual. And so, there's a little bit of pie in the sky sometimes, and it's kind of very like in rarefied air. And then you've got other people, other attorneys that are more grounded, 2 feet firmly planted on the ground, which is, I think, good for people that are dealing with probate, because definitely, even as a real estate broker, people are going through a very tough time in probate. Very good EQ, very good emotional intelligence to help guide them through these matters. So just share with me a little bit about your approach, just kind of your philosophy to attacking the whole thing.
Yeah, like you said, I take a very practical approach. And the reason is I've actually experienced loss in my own life in the last decade, even. Like I mentioned, my son Nathan passed away right after he was born. And my grandfather also passed away a couple of years ago. Kind of being on that side of the story and knowing what it feels like to lose somebody that you love, I know that a client is not going to want to have to like go through all of the legal nitty-gritty. They want something that's going to be very practical. They want something that's approachable, and that's understandable because they're going through a really tough time right now. The fog of grief it's a real thing. Like your brain is not working at the way it normally does. And so when I meet with a client, I try, first of all, to be very compassionate because I know they're going through a hard time. I know they're going through that brain fog of grief. I know what that feels like. And I know they don't want to be here. Nobody wants to be in this situation, but it's something we have to deal with just as a matter of course. Closing out a probate estate, people pass away, and we have to kind of clean up after them to take care of all of the business. I always tell people when they come in, the first thing is, I'm so sorry for your loss. Is there anything that you need from me at the outset that is going to make you feel more comfortable, that is going to put you in a good headspace? And I think people appreciate that. With my law firm, I will actually go out to people's homes if they're comfortable with it, for a first meeting, or to do a Zoom meeting if they prefer. Just because a lot of times, you've got a lot going on and you don't always want to have to stop what you're doing to go drive out to an attorney's office and sit somewhere where you feel uncomfortable. A lot of my clients also tend to be older when it's probate. And so sometimes they have mobility issues. Sometimes they have transportation issues. And so having the ability for the attorney to come to them and visit them in their space where they're comfortable is often a big plus for them. So I'll do that if that's what it takes for them to feel good. I also want to just point out that unfortunately, from a very practical standpoint, the first thing that you do need is a death certificate with probate. And sometimes that can take a long time to get, depending on the situation with the government and how things are going. But we can't really do very much without a death certificate. But while you were waiting for it, you can absolutely be doing things like going through the decedent's paperwork, see if you can find the original will, see if you can find bills that need to be paid, see if you can find things like life insurance policies, stocks, all that kind of stuff. It's a good thing to kind of just start going through, if you're able to, while you're waiting for the death certificate. And then once you get that death certificate, a lot of more things can fall into place. You can start taking that to banks. If you are a beneficiary, you can take it to your probate attorney to start the probate process.
I want to point something out real quick. You mentioned something earlier, which is people are going through a brain fog.
Yes.
We had a clinical psychologist on our program. I don't know if you saw it when you were going through our stuff. Krista, she's based here in Austin. By the way, if anyone needs any counseling or therapy, she's great. She was talking about how when she lost her mom, she was so. This is a PhD clinical psychologist, right? So we I guess we assume that she could maybe cope with it a little bit better. But she was just so out of it. She accidentally put her keys. She told us on the podcast. She put her keys in the freezer while she was putting and she totally forgot about it, and she couldn't find her keys, and she realized she left it. That's how. And it's interesting how you're like, we're talking a little bit. You're and I want to get back to it in a moment, but you're talking about like those first steps when someone has, they've lost their loved one or someone that's close to them. And there's these business items that are very important that they need to recover, documents they need to recover, things that need to happen. And in that fog, of grief, of pain, of uncertainty, of just shock, really just shock. I know when I lost I have to say that I've only lost one very, very close person in my life so far, which is my grandmother. I was closer to my grandmother than my mom, than anyone else in my family. If I think about it, I still
Yeah,
the shock kind of comes back to me. It's such
absolutely.
a huge loss. I can't imagine if I lost my wife or other people that are very close to me. But the reason why I'm mentioning this, Stephanie, is I'm glad that we're going through this very, it may sound very basic, but this is very important because people don't realize what needs to happen. I had a call yesterday from a prospective client that I've been in contact with them for almost a year. We've just been staying in touch. And it was very interesting because even now, after so much time has passed, they've been appointed. It's like we're just kind of like, we're going through to try to get things closed out. And of course, real estate's a big part of that closing out. But what's interesting is that they're like, Jeremy, I think we got to do this, we got to do that, we got to do this with the title. And there all this stuff that is like, no, you shouldn't do any of those things. It doesn't matter what it is for this discussion, but just some technical real estate things. I'm like, where are you getting that from? Who's telling you to do this? But they're just so wound up
Yes.
and they don't know. And so I was just like, okay, let's slow down for a moment. Let's talk through the situation. Okay, no, you don't need to spend $500 to do this at the title. Right, all this stuff. So anyway, I want to circle back and just say that this is really helpful because it's like, hey, let's slow down and let's start with the very basics of what we need. So just going back to what you were saying, the first step is we need a death certificate, right? We need the death certificate. Can I ask you a follow-up question on
Of
that?
course.
Because I am coming at this as a real estate broker. I sell property, I sell real estate, but I don't know the inner workings of, these government filings and what the lawyers are dealing with in their day-to-day. You mentioned something that kind of caught my attention. You said you never know with the government these days. Like, is it taking a long time? What are the challenges that you're seeing with this kind of thing?
So the thing that I was thinking about essentially was back in July of last year when we had those terrible floods and several people died. Several people were missing and just having to be declared dead because they couldn't find their bodies. It was awful. And a lot of people were having emergency type probate situations because so many people passed away unexpectedly. And the government arm that gets death certificates out was overwhelmed with the number of death certificates that they were having to get out in a short period of time. I think they were backed up like a good several months. Normally, it should take about 2 weeks to get a death certificate, but in certain situations like this one, it was taking several months. And not only that, but sometimes you don't get what's called a final death certificate that has like the cause of death, the autopsy, that kind of thing. It's not that you necessarily need that for the banks or for even the probate court, but it's technically not a final death certificate until you have all that. You also will have an issue sometimes, like if there was, again, you have the brain fog. Maybe when you were reading through the death certificate copy, you made a mistake on the address or on the way the name was spelled, and then you have to get an amended death certificate, which is, again, going to take more time. My suggestion is when you're going through this, it's really, really helpful to have a team behind you. So the first step is to find a good funeral home if you can. One that you're really comfortable with, because they can actually help you with so many of these initial first steps, the logistical issues that you just don't want to be dealing with while you're going through the grief issue.
Stephanie, you're the first person on our program that has mentioned this. This is actually very interesting. This is new information. So tell me a little bit go into a little bit more depth on that, because I have not heard anyone talk about this. And you actually gave me a very good idea for another show, which is maybe I need to get some people that are in funeral homes
Yeah.
in here. Tell me about that. That's actually, sorry, I don't mean to cut you off there or stop you in your tracks, but you kind of blew me away there for a moment. I never really actually considered this part of the chain, if you will, as having a role that would affect some of these other matters. So go into depth in that for me.
Yeah. And this is, a lot of this is coming from my own personal experience, again, with the people that I've lost. But the funeral home is the one that they can be your point of contact for actually ordering the death certificate, for getting a lot of these more logistical items out of the way. Somebody dies, and then if you're at a hospital or if you're at home on hospice, and I do recommend, if you have an elderly person who is expecting to pass, that you get them on hospice, because then you just call the hospice people, and the hospice people can take away the body. They can get all the equipment. If you have an elderly person who's expecting to pass and they're not on hospice, you have to call the police. And that can be, I would think, traumatic to, the loved ones who are watching the police, who may or may not have the best skills at transporting a loved one's body out of the home. It can be very delicate. It's a very delicate situation. But in any case, so hospice is great if the person is expecting to pass soon, because they'll take care of everything. Having the funeral home is your next point of contact, because they can help with expediting a death certificate. They can help you with all these logistical items. And obviously, like the issues like cremation, burial, funeral, all of those things are what are top of mind for people who have just lost somebody. And even then, you don't always want to be thinking about that immediately after someone has passed. But the hospital sometimes will just be like, I need this information, I need this information, I need this information. And you're just like, I can't, you need to go away and talk to somebody else, because I cannot be dealing with all of this right now. So having a funeral home who is considerate, who is understanding what you're going through, who's going to take the time to hold your hand, can be very, very helpful during this time.
That's very interesting. I think I'm going to, now that you've mentioned this, I'm going to ask someone, if you have a recommendation, please let me know and I'll have them on the podcast. So we have the death certificate. That's a very interesting, that's like it kind of reminds me, both my children were born in Abu Dhabi.
Yeah.
And because I lived there for 5 years in a previous life. And I remember when they were born, this is the other side of life, the hospital, their procedure there is that they give you a paper from the hospital, okay? Like, it's just kind of like, okay, these are the parents, this is the kid, right? And you take it to the Department of Health, and then they issue the birth certificate, yes. Right? But that paper is like the first in the chain. It's like, that is the first. I sometimes think about all their identity documents, all that. It all came from that one little piece of paper, in Abu Dhabi, of all places. And here we're at the end of life, and that we have the death certificate now, which is almost like it's opposite.
Right.
And that's like the chain, the beginning of the chain of paper for this process.
Yes.
Is that fair enough to say?
Yes.
Yeah. So one of the things that we talked about in preparation for our time here together was dealing with institutions. What's your take on that? Not only give us a sense of the lay of the land, but also what's some very practical advice that you can give to people as they're dealing with these entities?
Yeah. So unfortunately, the truth of the matter is you can do everything right by the letter of the law. You can get your letters testamentary. You can be appointed the executor of the estate. And you go to the institutions just to close out a bank account, or you try to get the life insurance death benefit, or you try to close out the IRA. And if you're working with people who are not well trained in probate, and you would think that people die every day. Most people should be trained in probate because this is something that is not unusual. People die every day. But a lot of banks, a lot of financial institutions, they just do not know how to deal with these issues. And they can set up some major roadblocks for you because they don't know what they're doing, unfortunately. I just had very recently a client who there was no will, so they were appointed independent administrator, and they received letters of independent administration, which is what you have when there's no will. When you have a will, you have letters testamentary, and you have an appointed executor. It's the same thing, but we use different words for when there's a will and when there's not a will. Went to a Bank of America to close out his father's estate. He was the appointed administrator. He had his letters of independent administration, talked to the banker who said, oh, no, you need letters testamentary. And of course, my client is confused and he's upset and he's calling me going, what are letters testamentary? Why do I not have those? And I have to explain to him, they're the same thing. We just use different words because your father did not have a will. Go to a different branch, try again. If you still have a problem, get me on the phone. I will yell at that banker for you and explain what the issue is. So he went to another branch and there was no problem. So it was just a matter of the person he was talking to at that particular branch didn't know what they were talking about. And that could have caused a really big roadblock for him if he got stuck there. I had to actually effectively serve as an independent administrator myself one time for a client, a decedent who I actually personally knew passed away. He was young, didn't have any kids, wasn't married. All his family were in Korea. And the independent administrator is fine to appoint an independent administrator who was in Korea. That wasn't legally a problem. But from a practical standpoint, the time zones, even just trying to call the banks, it was difficult. So I ended up having to get a special durable power of attorney for the independent administrator to talk to the banks and effectively do the legwork of being an independent administrator here while she was in Korea. And I tell you, the banks do not call you back. You talk to somebody like for 30 minutes, you have to give them all this information, yada, 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 yada. They say, oh, okay, yeah, we'll get this issued to you within 5 business days. 5 business days pass. Nobody calls you back. You have to call again. And you're talking to a completely different person who may or may have not taken good notes in the computer system about what you talked about the first time. So it can be very frustrating. I understand the pain that my personal representatives are going through. It can be extremely irritating that our financial institutions are not well trained in this aspect of life. And it can be very frustrating that we have to repeat over and over and over what's going on because, again, the brain fog, the grief, you don't want to have to be going through all this while you're dealing with all this other stuff. So a couple of tips that I do have when you're on the phone with somebody, make sure you write down what day you called, what time you called, who you spoke with, what you talked about, have a log. And that way, at least you have a good record of what was said the last time. And you can say, hey, I've talked to 3 different people about this already. I need to talk to a manager now, or, something to that effect when it starts getting to be too much.
It's interesting because one of the issues I come across frequently with properties in probate is there is a relative, like it's not uncommon to find properties that are going into a delinquent status.
Right.
Because it's like, it was mortgages paid on auto pay and there's a bank account that has only so much money in there. Unfortunately, it doesn't auto regenerate. And so it's just dwindling down until it gets to 0. And then it's like, okay, well, there's nothing we can do. Sometimes if the personal representative has funds, they might keep it going, but a lot of times they can't, right? They can't keep it going. And I have had to help them talk with the bank because it's going into like a pre-foreclosure
Right.
status. And, it's like it's a different department and there's like maybe like 2 or 3 departments that are kind of dealing with it. They don't talk to each other. There's no continuity of conversations, as you said. It's extremely frustrating and it's stressful for the people because it's like maybe there's equity in that property.
Right.
They don't want it to, right? They don't want it to, they don't want to lose it. And so it's very, very, it's a pain. It's stressful. It causes a lot of anxiety. So I totally understand what you're talking about, and I've seen it just from a little bit of a different angle. So I totally get it. Is there any other things that you've noticed, dealing with, when you're having to interface with these big companies and entities, government, business, whatever? Are there any other aspects that people need to think about or should do?
I think the best thing when you're walking into a bank is to come prepared. So it helps if you, as the personal representative, have a general understanding of what you've done through the probate process. I was appointed the independent executor. I know what that means. I have letters testamentary. It means that I have the authority to act on behalf of the estate. Nobody else has it, just me. Nobody else can act on behalf of the estate because the person who owned this property is now dead. And I'm stepping into their shoes as their personal representative of the estate, the independent executor or administrator if there was no will. So coming in prepared with the proper paperwork, with the death certificate, your letters testamentary, a general understanding of what that means and what you have the authority to do is really helpful because, again, you'll come up to a banker who's like, oh, no, you need X, Y, and Z. And you're like, no, I don't need X, Y, and Z. If you need to get an attorney on the phone, actually explain politely the law to the bankers because a lot of times they don't know. That's fine. I'm constantly speaking with banks or writing them letters, politely explaining the law and pointing out the language and the orders that say this is what you're supposed to do. It's interesting to me because the front desk banker people are great and in terms of just interfacing with clients, but they don't have the legal background to know what all these things are, and no one expects them to. They just send it back to their legal department. So to me, it's interesting that a lot of times my clients are having such a hard time. They're getting wrong information from these bankers at the front when I'm like, the bankers at the front usually just send it back to their legal department and then let the legal department handle it. So it's interesting to me to see that we have a lot of miscommunication in the banking industry, and that's unfortunate, but it happens. It's real life. So I think, yeah, just really trying to come in as prepared as possible. Talk to your attorney beforehand before you go in. What do I need? What do I need to say? If they give me trouble, what should I do? Can I call you? That sort of thing it's helpful to come prepared.
Stephanie, what I find very interesting is the older I get and the more, I just think of just the arc of my life of going through things. And it's like, there's so many things in life that are extremely important that we're going to have to do, but there's no class on it.
Right.
There was no class on probate, what to do when someone dies in high school or college. And these are like, how to do your taxes.
Yeah.
There's so many things that we experience as people in life, just civic life, just, things that are happening in our life and the interfaces with the government. We have to do, someone dies. There's so many people we have to interact with and process and procedure. And no one teaches us what to do in these situations, what needs to get done. There's not really a lot of good information out there. Even if you go to, a big topic of conversation these days, especially even on this podcast is, AI. People are going to AI for everything, for all the answers. And I can tell you, Stephanie, and not to get too off the trail here, but just in real estate. Okay, now my business is in a very narrow lane, and I'm an expert in that lane. I know what's going on in this lane. Okay. And I have people, recently I'm coming across people who it's like, I say something, they're going on ChatGPT, and they're like, well, Jeremy, no, it's this. And I'm like, well, no, because, this is, they don't have the context. They don't know how certain things apply to their situation. Some things may not be relevant. Some things may be a concern, but it's not really concern for them. So it's like, don't worry about it. And it's interesting. We're living in a time where there's so much information. And the problem is that there's not a lot of context or, the reliability of that information. It's like, it's, yes, you're getting this information, but maybe that's good for Minnesota.
Right.
Maybe that's good for California.
Right.
I know for a fact, and I've learned this just from doing this podcast, is how different, for example, probate is from California to Texas. It couldn't be more different.
Right.
It couldn't be more different. I had a very good conversation with an attorney on that one point. And you from California, I'm sure you're an expert in that and you know all about it. It couldn't be more different. I was really floored by it. I was like, wow, that is different. Actually, I think it's better here in Texas, in my opinion. But it's that's why you need it. And that's actually the goal of this podcast, by the way, Stephanie. I mean, it's to provide people with good information, because if you're reading a blog post, who wrote that blog post?
Yes.
Who wrote that? Where did that come from? Who looked it over? How much time did they spend to make sure that that was accurate? So that's why I like to get people like you, real professionals, experts on here to talk about what they know that they're actually experts in. But just out of curiosity, are you finding that at all?
Oh.
Are you finding your clients go into ChatGPT or Claude and then telling you a bunch of stuff and you're like, what the heck are you talking about?
It's, yes, to put it lightly. I mean, ChatGPT is everywhere. My husband used ChatGPT to write a Valentine's Day card for me a couple of years ago.
Okay.
Don't recommend that, men. Don't recommend that. I was able to see through it right away. Yes, everybody's using ChatGPT, AI, all the things. And I get it. It makes life a little bit more efficient in a lot of ways. You feel like, oh, I have some knowledge and background on what I can ask. Because sometimes you go into a thing and you don't even know what you don't know. You don't know what questions you need to ask. And so it's totally understandable that people are trying to get as much information as possible and trying to feel comfortable in these conversations and not just like, I don't know what they're talking about. And that's good. I like it when people can come in and be somewhat educated. Now, the problem is, like you said, where they're getting this information may or may not be good information. I had a talk just the other day with a good friend whose husband was reading something about ladybird deeds versus transfer on death deeds. And he's telling me this and that about what he read. And I said, where did you read that? And he goes, well, online. And I said, yes, I understand. But what website? Like, was it an attorney's website? Was it Wikipedia? Was it just, Google doing their AI summary type thing? Because sometimes, depending on what site you're on, it could be completely misleading. It could be a site from California when you're in Texas. And like you said, the laws are completely different. I do have clients who will sometimes say, oh, my friend in Tennessee did blah, blah, blah. And I go, well, that's great, but Tennessee is neither here nor there in terms of what we're doing here in Texas. Their laws are completely different. And a lot of people don't know that. They don't know that lovely federalism, all the states have different laws and are allowed to come up with their own way of doing things. A lot of times it's similar. But yeah, Texas, California, New York, Illinois, they're all completely different. Louisiana does something really weird with like French law. I don't even know, but it's supposedly really strange and you don't want to have a probate in Louisiana. So that's why when you come to an attorney with a specific set of facts, the attorney for your jurisdiction, in this case, Texas, is going to tell you exactly what you need to do for this jurisdiction. And what's even more interesting is that depending on what county you live in, it might be a little bit different too. It's supposed to be statewide.
Actually, I want to go into this in a little bit more depth. So I work in a lot of different counties, and again, I'm looking at it from a real estate perspective, but this is all about probate, everything probate. This fascinates me actually. As a layman, looking at this from when I say layman, towards the legal aspect, I find this kind of interesting. Can you please go into a little bit more depth on what this variation looks like and what it means in practice?
Yes. And so each county, and there are many counties in Texas, as you know, are going to be a little bit different in how they handle a probate. So we're in Austin, Travis County. Travis County, Judge Guy Herman has been on the bench longer than I've been alive. And so he does everything by the book, which is great because you know that whatever he's doing is correct. But sometimes there are little things where you're sort of like, oh, do we really need to appoint an ad litem for this thing? An ad litem attorney is an attorney who's appointed by the court to come in and like do an investigation, usually into like the decedent's family history. So like if their job is to kind of suss out whether there were any marriages that nobody's talking about that resulted in potential children that nobody's talking about who are actually entitled to a portion of the estate. But the rest of the families, nobody talks about it or doesn't know about it. And so the attorney ad litem's job is to kind of do a independent investigation into this kind of thing to make sure that all the family members are known and are in the mix. So for instance, Williamson County, which is not far from Travis County in terms of distance, Judge McMaster, who's going to be retiring actually, but he's a lot more lax on certain aspects of needing to appoint an ad litem attorney. Whereas in the exact same situation, Judge Herman in Travis County would be like, no, we absolutely needed an attorney ad litem appointed. So in some of our very more rural counties, I've had the pleasure of dealing with mineral rights cases sometimes where you have, somebody even from another state. I had a guy who died in California. He had a revocable living trust, so nothing actually had to go through probate in California. Yay for him. But he owned mineral rights in Texas that were not part of the trust, and they were under his name when he died. And so those had to go through probate. And mineral rights are always in these small kind of rural counties. And the judges out there are usually county court at law judges, which means that they handle not just probate, but also family law, criminal law, bankruptcy, all the things within the same day sometimes. And so they're not always as specifically well-versed on the probate law as maybe Judge Herman would be, because he sees probate cases all the time, every day. That's his bread and butter life. And so when I'm working with some of these smaller counties, the judges are like, sometimes they're not as informed about the law. And it's a little concerning because I'm like, well, I, as the attorney, don't want to have to educate you, judge, on what the law is, because that's awkward. But you are wrong about that. And
do you find yourself doing that a lot in those? Do you find yourself doing that a lot?
Not terribly often, but there are some judges so for instance, you need to have the original will. When you probate a will, you're supposed to present the original, but it is possible to probate a copy. There are some extra hoops that you have to jump through, but it's possible to do that. Well, I had this one guy who died in California. He had lodged his original will in California because California requires them to do that. So we couldn't get the original will. And one of the smaller courts out here in Texas was like, no, but we need the original will. We can't do it without the original. And I was very politely trying to say, with respect, Your Honor, I know it is possible to probate a copy of a will. There are just, there are these extra steps we have to go through. It was a whole thing. Luckily, we had the option of choosing which county we could probate because the guy had mineral rights in like 3 different counties. So we were able to actually
So
pick.
you're shopping? Are you shopping for venues?
I was shopping for venues. I was trying to find a judge who wouldn't require an ad litem attorney and who, was going to allow me to submit a certified copy or an authenticated copy from the California court of the original will. We found it was fine. It worked out. And a lot of our county judges are really, I don't want to say laid back because that's not the right word, but they are understanding of some of the nuances that occur and some of the hardships that are kind of like not allowing you to go by the exact letter of, the law, the way, and again, Judge Herman being very by the book would have said, no, you have to do X, Y, and Z. And that's fine. But, sometimes it's nice when you get a judge who's like, okay, no, that's fine. We'll just let it go this way.
I'm kind of picturing in my mind those old Western movies. You got the sheriff, you got the judge, right? And the judge is kind of like, like he's just kind of keeping order, keeping peace in the town, right? But he's like, he's very practical, right?
Yeah.
Very pragmatic in his approach, right?
Yeah. I love it when we can get smaller county judges who are just like, it's fine. You don't need to do a whole ad litem, pay an extra $600. Why? We got it. We can figure it out. So
yeah. I want to talk, I want to move our conversation a little bit into real estate. What are some of the things that you see surrounding real estate and probate? Maybe things you've noticed in your practice, things that you think people should know, maybe problems that you see keep reoccurring. I'd be very curious to just hear your perspective on Texas probate real estate.
Sure. Texas probate real estate. Well, the first thing that I'll say is that usually with a probate these days, the only thing that actually goes through probate is the real estate. And that has to do with how the asset is titled. Most of the time, people have financial accounts, bank accounts, mortgage accounts, what have you, that allow for a beneficiary to be named. And then that doesn't have to go through probate. It just goes directly to the beneficiary when you present a death certificate. Well, for whatever reason, Texas real estate, usually you have a married couple who both own 50% of the house because they bought the house when they got married. And it's in both the husband and the wife's name, but it doesn't have rights of survivorship, which means that when one joint account holder dies, the other is supposed to be able to take 100% of the asset without probate. But in Texas, we don't do deeds for real estate jointly owned with rights of survivorship as a typical nature because apparently there has to be another document that's actually agreed to about the rights of survivorship. And I guess people just don't want to deal with that. So you always end up having a husband and a wife who own property together. And then when one spouse dies, the surviving spouse thinks a lot of the time, oh, well, we both owned it together. I should be able to just take the property, and he left it to me from the will or whatever. I should be able to just take this property without having to go through probate. And that's not the case because the property wasn't owned jointly with rights of survivorship. So you do actually have to probate the house, the real estate, even if it's got both your names on it, in order to get deceased spouse's name off and entirely into surviving spouse's name. And it's not always with spouses, but this is the typical case.
I want to ask you a question here. We were talking about transfer on death, ladybird deeds earlier. You had brought it up. What do you think in terms of like a strategy, let's say a personal legal strategy, a personal, estate planning is really what attorneys would call it. But just as you're thinking about, okay, we've got the will, we've got the trust, but should people really be looking at why would you do, let's say, a transfer on death deed or a ladybird deed versus, let's say, a trust or some of these other options? Where is that appropriate? When do you think that should happen?
Yeah, a lot of people come to me saying, I want a trust. And I go, okay, there are a lot of different kinds of trusts. What kind of trust are you talking about? And what do you think this trust is? Because there's a lot of misinformation out there from Google. A revocable living trust is usually the kind of trust people are talking about when they say, I want a trust. A revocable living trust, I think of it like a bucket. The goal is to put all of your assets into that bucket before you die. Anything in that bucket gets to avoid probate. Yay. It gets to avoid probate because it's titled not in your individual name at your death, but in the name of the bucket. Anything in your individual name at your death that does not have a beneficiary designation and is not titled jointly with rights of survivorship or something like that has to go through probate. So some people go, okay, I want a trust. And I go, okay, let's talk about your assets. Let's talk about what you have. Okay, you've got a house that's owned by husband and wife. Both are on the deed. Great. You've got a bank account, a joint bank account with rights of survivorship. Okay, that's going to go to surviving spouse upon first spouse's death. And then you have beneficiaries after that, your adult kids. Great. You have a car that is owned jointly, and you've both signed the title where it says rights of survivorship. It's a really easy way to get that through rights of survivorship without having to go through probate to the surviving spouse. And you have like an IRA, okay, that has, again, a beneficiary named. So that's going to go to the beneficiary. It avoids probate. The only thing that is going to go through probate is the house. So do you need a trust? Well, a trust is the real benefit of having a revocable living trust is that it gets your assets out of probate. Most of your assets are going to avoid probate anyway in this situation. So having a revocable living trust isn't necessarily going to give you that much of a benefit. Yeah, you could put your house in the trust, but you could also just do a transfer on death deed or a ladybird deed. It'll get you the same effect where your beneficiary will be able to take ownership of the house without having to go through probate. Now, there are some instances where, like, if you have minor kids, you can't name a minor kid on a transfer on death deed or a ladybird deed. There are some issues with deeds where it's like, oh, well, if this person dies and I really want it to go to charity, or I want it to do this and that and that. You can't say all that in a deed with all the contingencies. So if you have those particular situations where you have specific order that you want it to go in, or if you have minor kids that you want it to go to, then yeah, maybe a trust might be a better option for you. But otherwise, I think I do a lot of just wills with transfer on death deeds, and it's surprising how many people that works for when really the only asset that will go through probate is the house. And it works well for them because it's like, oh, well, at my death, I just name this beneficiary and it's easy. So I kind of like that.
Yeah. Is that different from other states? Is that something unique to Texas, or how is that nationwide? They have that kind of option?
Not all states have transfer on death deeds. Most do, but I know for a fact that like Mississippi does not. So you wouldn't be able to necessarily do a transfer on death deed in every single state. You might have to do the revocable living trust option. Certain states, also California, Illinois, New York, you need a revocable living trust generally because probate is just, everybody does them because probate is just awful and expensive. Yeah. So yeah, it is state specific.
Going to real estate specifically in probate, what are some of the challenges you see people are, I mean, other than the husband and wife, have you seen any other things kind of coming up with the real estate that is problematic when they're in probate?
So a couple of things that just off the top of my head. One, you were mentioning earlier how sometimes the mortgage stops getting paid because, you know, it might be coming out of an auto bank account and the bank account just dwindles. The mortgage company usually doesn't care who's paying the mortgage as long as the mortgage keeps getting paid. But once it stops getting paid, that's when you start running into issues. So in probate, if I see that there's some issues with the mortgage company's like, hey, third notice that we haven't been paid, you automatically get on the phone and say, hey, this is going through probate. That usually tells the mortgage company, okay, I'm going to stop here because I know that is going through probate. I know that we're going to eventually get this taken care of. It's just going to take a little bit of time because sometimes the probate process can take a little bit of time. You take a couple weeks, maybe a month kind of thing. So there's that. So if you have a situation where it's possible the house is going to go through like foreclosure because the mortgage isn't getting paid, you immediately want to contact the mortgage company. And then they'll start telling you things like, oh, how to become a successor and interest on the mortgage and all that stuff, which is what they're interested in, is getting a new person to be responsible for the mortgage. But just, you know, letting them know that it's going through probate will usually put a stop to that foreclosure process because they know, okay, it's going to take a little bit of time. The second thing, and this is actually kind of important, if you have a house that is not empty, it's vacant because the decedent passed away and nobody else was living there, it's important to maintain insurance on that house. I've actually had a couple of cases where there was a vacant house. It got broken into, things were stolen, stuff was messed up. And the executor or the administrator, the personal representative, is technically responsible for that asset and liable for damage that came to that asset if it's, you know, going to decrease the value to the beneficiaries. Health
So
insurance.
I want to comment a couple of things on what you said. Yeah, that's very good advice. That actually, Stephanie, when I am talking with people who reach out to me to talk about, potentially becoming a client, they're already going through this process. They're usually pretty much, they file, they're on their way. But I always ask them, I go, is the house vacant? And if it's vacant, do you have insurance on it? And and a lot of times they haven't thought about it, but it's precisely for this reason. Also, if it's vacant, there's a risk of squatters going in there. I've had multiple situations where there were, squatters had taken over,
Ooh.
and now they had to go into an eviction process and get them out of there. It's not so straightforward. You can't just go in there and drag them out
Right.
by their hair. So it is a serious matter. I want to share something with you, Stephanie, and that I find that I think is very important, and a little bit about kind of what we do here at Texas Probate Real Estate, and something that I don't think a lot of attorneys are aware of. But the minute a filing occurs, investors from all over the United States are descend upon the personal representative, okay, to try to get that property. And it's interesting, Stephanie, because I have made a business decision. I have made a business decision with my company. So I'm a little bit different. I own this company. It's not a huge company, but I'm the owner. I'm the broker. I can kind of do what I want here, and as long as it's legal, okay, and ethical. But the thing is that I've made a decision. So here's the thing. We know that when a filing happens and there's real estate involved, there's a very high chance that that real estate will probably be sold. Now, if it's a surviving spouse, they're probably going to keep it for a while. They might continue to live there, but a very good percentage are going to sell. Now, the question is, what is the best route? And it's hard because they're getting a lot of messages. And one of the things that I have learned from experience, I've been practicing real estate for almost 10 years now. And one of the things that I have noticed is houses that are in probate very frequently and typically have a lot of deferred maintenance, have, maybe someone was towards the end of their life. I mean, unless it was an untimely demise, it was, they probably were older. They were going through illness, sickness, financial problems towards the end of their life. Very, very normal, very, very common. And so, the house is not their priority. It's not, it's the last thing on their mind. They can't take the house with them, right? So they're just trying to hang on to the end. And so what happens is these properties, they're not always. Sometimes they're beautiful. Sometimes they're beautiful. They're nice. They're amazing. I sold not too long ago a beautiful house in Driftwood. It was amazing. It was beautiful, beautiful land, beautiful house. It was amazing. But a lot of them are not like that. And so what happens is the investors come in and they're like, Stephanie, I know it's really hard time. They play on the empathy. Oh, I know it's really hard. Everything's really tough. Blah blah blah. It's fake, right? Oh, this that, and then they ask about the house, and then it's like they start finding the chink in the armor. Okay, it's got old roof. It's got foundation problem. It's got raccoons in the attic. It's got the whole thing going on. And they go, Stephanie, probably not going to be able to sell that with a real estate agent. You're going to have to fix it up. You're going to have to put all this money in it, right? To discourage them from bringing it to the market. And let me say another thing. A lot of real estate agents, because I don't know if you know this, Stephanie, real estate agents have a very big problem. Ego. Lots of ego in the real estate business. Okay. And a lot of real estate agents are very, how shall I put it? They don't want to, like, if the house doesn't look perfect and it doesn't look like some sort of like model home that's going to look good on Zillow or something, they're kind of afraid to do it. They feel like maybe it looks bad on them. Like, oh, it's like some portfolio or something, which is ridiculous. Right. And so a lot of times, as these executors and administrators are trying to find a solution, because really there's a couple outcomes that they're looking for. Money. So money is one outcome, but time is also a factor. And then there's also just experience. They're already going through a lot. They've gone through a lot of legal stuff. Maybe that had a lot of issues, right? So there's kind of three things going on. And these investors are coming in and they're providing what appears to be, unless you scrutinize it, a very quick solution. Okay, yeah, you don't have to pay a real estate commission, but it doesn't matter if I'm getting 20% less of what it's worth, right? Because the real estate commission is not going to be 20 going to be 20% of the equity, right? So they're constructing all these arguments and positioning to try to get them into a private sale,
Mhm.
which is not, they can do that if everyone agrees and they can do that. But really, there are ways to sell real estate and ways to do real estate where we can sell properties like that very quickly. And for when I say the most amount of money, Stephanie, what I mean by that is that maybe it will not sell, a house that has a lot of deferred maintenance. No, it's not going to sell for the same price as a house that's in tip-top shape. But if you think about it from a cost basis perspective, what would it cost me to bring it to this standard? And what would be my net afterwards? It's going to be better just to sell it as is the vast majority of the time. And a lot of real estate agents don't get that. The investors know that. They know that the average agent is going to try to get them into doing all these repairs. There's a lot of schemes these days as well, Stephanie, of brokerages giving loans
Mm.
to people, not just in probate, but to people to try to fix up their house and all that, which is terrible because what if you no longer want to be in that relationship? Now you've got this debt tied to this company, so there's all these gimmicks and things that sound like they're very consumer friendly, but they're actually not. And so I just wanted to just put this out here is that that's one of the things where, at least with me and my company and what we're trying to do is really bring sanity to the real estate part of this situation. That is that there's no house that is so far gone that it cannot be sold in a way that gives it maximum exposure to the market, so that even if an investor buys it, they're buying it in a competitive bidding situation, which allows the market value to present itself and that price discovery to happen. There's no situation where someone should have to feel that they need to basically give it away to an investor without the benefit of competition and exposure in the
Mhm.
marketplace. And I have found, and you mentioned this, is that real estate is very frequently the principal asset that this is surrounding, because you got three people that are going to benefit from the proceeds of this property. They need to liquidate, and it's a big deal, right? So how do you go about it? What's the solution? Who's going to tell personal representative the truth of what their options are? One of the things that I even do is, I'll talk to them. They'll say, "Oh, I have a cash offer," which is like I kind of think about that as like, well, so what? Who cares? But they think it's a big deal. Oh, I got this cash offer. I got this cash offer. But most of the cash offers are fake. They're wholesalers. They're just trying to assign a contract. They're not even the end buyer, and the consumer has no idea about this part of the real estate industry. They don't know that, if you go on YouTube, type in real estate wholesaling, all they're doing is tying up properties, putting it under contract, trying to find a buyer. They don't find the buyer. And by the way, they're not using Trek contracts. They're using their own little, contract that they got at the half-day seminar
Mhm.
with the hot dog in downtown. So it doesn't have any of the protections to the seller. It doesn't have any of the protections that should be there, that like earnest money, like serious earnest money, serious remedies if they don't perform their contract. And so I started a thing where it's like, hey, you have a cash offer? You know what? Let's get on Zoom. Show me the contract. I will give you, not as a lawyer. I'm not going to evaluate it as an attorney, but I'm going to evaluate it as a real
Mhm.
estate broker. What does this look like? No questions asked. And you're not obligated to use me. You're not obligated to do business with me. Just show it to me. And because I know that when I know what I'm going to see, and I know it's not going to be great. And I know if they understand it, they're not going to want to do that. So this is just to say, Stephanie, that it's very similar to the attorneys, right? It's like, you want a good attorney. You want an attorney. You probably don't want the criminal law attorney to do your probate. He probably doesn't want to do your probate, actually, but you don't want the mineral rights guy, okay? The mineral rights attorney, okay? Right? We have a lot of those guys here, right? Oil and
Mhm.
gas, right? Right? You probably don't want him doing your probate. You want Stephanie. You want Stephanie to do your probate, right? You want Stephanie to do your probate because she does probate. She does breakfast, lunch, and dinner. She does probate. She knows what's going on probate. And I think the same is true with real estate. You want an agent, a broker that understand, they're not doing your probate, but that understands probate, understands what's going on, understands that, look, maybe the property's great. That's fine. We sell it, it's great. It looks wonderful. Great. But maybe it's not so great. And maybe you don't need to spend 10, 15, $20,000 that you don't have, that the estate doesn't have, to do these things that you think you need to do. And actually, let's just close this out. Like, instead of you waiting, the market's going down. Like right now, the market is declining. So instead of waiting for the market to go down to to make hypothetically potentially more money, which is actually you're not able to really even calculate it and verify it. Maybe it's better to actually just sell and not have that opportunity cost of waiting. So I think there's a lot of there's a lot of similarity, selection of attorney, selection of brokers, or, and it's very interesting. You said something that was very interesting, and you were the first person that put it this way, which is that the real estate, I knew that intuitively. I know that real estate is the main asset, but even as you're talking about, like you're saying, for most people, just the will and, this special deed, that's enough for a lot of people because usually the real estate is the main deal,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. The real estate typically is your largest asset. And I just want to say thank you, Jeremy, for being the kind of realtor, the kind of broker, the kind of person who's not going to be predatory towards clients who are in a very vulnerable position. People who are going through probate are very vulnerable. And definitely I've had clients who are telling me, hey, I'm getting all these calls from realtors and da 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 da. I'm like, that is so rude. Most people, let's just put it out there, most people know a realtor, whether it's a friend or someone they met at work or like whatever. Most people do know a realtor. So if they need to reach out, they will reach out. If they don't know a realtor, you can always get a referral from your attorney, from your CPA, from your financial advisor. I promise we all know realtors. But knowing good realtors, again, who know probate, who are familiar with that, they're going to be able to help you with the resources that are needed, like doing an estate sale kind of thing. And there are good estate salespeople and there are really bad estate salespeople. Like you were saying, selling the house as is, the number one complaint I get from personal representatives is the stress of having to do the maintenance and get the house in order to sell. I had one client who was an executor for an estate where the house was actually specifically bequeathed to an individual, and that individual wanted to sell it. And so I told the personal representative, I was like, let her sell it if she wants it. It's her house now at date of death. Give it to her and let her sell it. She goes, oh, no, like I'll take care of it. And I go, that's going to be a lot of work. You are not going to be happy. And she was it took a long time. The contractors and the scheduling and all the things. It's a lot of stress for the personal representative to have to do that. So if you don't have to, don't do it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Stephanie, can you believe it? We've been at this for an hour and I really want to thank you. There's probably nothing more important to an attorney than their time. And so I appreciate your time. I want to really thank you for accepting my invitation to come on the Texas Probate Real Estate Podcast. Just before we go, I always like to ask our guests, especially when they're an attorney, what is the number one, someone out there in the ether, someone's listening to it on Apple Podcast or Spotify, or they see the video on YouTube later. Someone's going to hear this. Someone's going to listen to this. This is a word now that they're going to hear. If you could give one piece of advice to someone listening in this situation, what would that be?
I would say take a deep breath. Take a deep breath and know that you're going to get through this. And also, like Jeremy was saying, build a good team, a team that is experienced in this realm, but more importantly, that cares about you as a person and what you're going through. Because a lot of the times you're just going to need a little extra handholding, and that is okay. And it's understandable. And it's okay to say, that's what I need. So if you can build a team that understands that and is going to be able to cater to those needs, you're going to be in good hands.
That's awesome. Now, Stephanie, someone's going to want to hire you. Someone needs a very good attorney, and you're the right attorney for them. There is no other attorney on planet Earth that's going to do a better job than you with them. How can they get a hold of you?
The best way to get a hold of me is via email, louielegacylaw@gmail.com. My website is Louie Legacy Law, so you can just look me up there and send me a message. My contact info is there. But yeah, I work really well on email because sometimes you just can't always get to the phone if you're in the middle of something with the client or in a signing. So please do feel free to email me, and I promise to respond quickly.
It's wonderful. We will put your information in the show notes of this program. You have my highest endorsement, and I do recommend that if what areas are you, what realistically are the areas that you work geographically?
So I live in Georgetown, so Williamson County's my favorite because it's close by, but I also do Travis, obviously. Gotta love Judge Herman. I've done Bexar County because they do Zoom hearings. I've done Burnett, and I've done Bastrop, and Hayes too. So I can go anywhere. I prefer if the judge will allow for a Zoom hearing if it's a little bit further away, because I don't want to have to be driving, a whole heck of a lot of time out there. Plus, that's money on the client that has to get charged. So if the court will do a Zoom hearing, then I can probably help you out.
Awesome. Again, Stephanie, thank you so much. Thank you so much for being on the program. And again, if you're listening to this podcast, I think there was a lot of things that were shared here that are really nuggets of wisdom. Go back, check out our YouTube channel, check us out on all the places where you can get your podcasts on Apple and Spotify. And again, my name is Jeremy Kritt. I'm the owner and broker of Kritt Real Estate, founder of Texas Probate Real Estate. I hope that you will join us in future episodes. And by the way, if you're in probate and you're thinking about selling that property in probate, give me a call. All of my information is all over the internet. Just find me and I can help you basically as far north as Bell County and also even, of course, Central Texas, Austin, and San Antonio. So I cover all of those areas in probate real estate. Again, Stephanie, thank you very much. And we'll see you on the next one.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.